Have you ever felt like you could always do it, but somehow it always feels like you are just missing a tiny bit before reaching success? You constantly feel like your brain is always one beat slower than everyone else, and you feel like you already know where the problem is, yet you just can't immediately pinpoint it, as if something is blinding you. Just one step away, when the brain falls one beat behind and the barriers of cognitive ghosts. Perhaps all of us have been in a state where you feel like you've already grasped everything, and only one final step is needed to touch success. But that door always seems slightly out of reach, and you cannot explain why. The feeling that your brain is one beat slower, as if being blinded by some invisible force, is not an illusion or a personal weakness. It is a direct result of the unique and sometimes paradoxical way the human brain operates, as explained by modern neuroscience and psychology. 1. The paradox of slowness. Why does our brain process so slowly? The feeling that your brain is one beat behind has a stronger scientific basis than you might expect. A groundbreaking study published in the journal Neuron in late 2024 revealed a shocking truth. The conscious information processing speed of the human brain reaches only about 10 bits per second. Compare this to the speed at which our sensory systems gather data from the environment, around 1 billion bits per second. This means that every second, your eyes, ears, and senses scan an enormous amount of information, hundreds of millions of times greater than what your conscious mind can process. We live in a high-speed world, yet we can only think at the speed of an old mechanical typewriter, roughly 10 characters per second. This explains a familiar feeling. When you are trying to solve a problem, it feels like there is a bottleneck in your mind. You know you have the data, you know you have the knowledge, but you simply cannot move any faster. Scientists call this the unbearable slowness of being. You are not slower than others in any abnormal way. You are simply operating within the biological limits of the human brain, limits that even world champions in memory or Rubik's Cube solving cannot surpass. 2. Being blinded, when the brain creates invisible walls. The feeling of being blinded, or knowing where the problem is but not being able to see it clearly, is closely related to a series of cognitive biases that psychology has identified. The floating duck syndrome. In academic and professional environments, we often see others appearing to achieve success effortlessly. Researchers at Cambridge and Stanford describe this phenomenon as the floating duck syndrome. Like a duck gliding smoothly across the water, appearing calm and effortless, while beneath the surface, its legs are paddling intensely. When we only see success without seeing the hard effort behind it, failures, late nights, rejections, the brain automatically updates itself with distorted information. You begin to think others are better simply because they don't seem to struggle. This leads to a toxic loop. You feel inferior. You spread your efforts too thin trying to prove yourself, and eventually you burn out with extremely low success relative to the effort you put in. The feeling of just missing a little is actually a feeling of missing the invisible effort that you cannot see in others. The wall of negative emotions. The feeling of being slower and blinded often comes with frustration, anxiety, and sometimes anger toward yourself. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows that although negative emotions, like anxiety and anger, can generate short bursts of energy, they ultimately damage strategic thinking and create health problems, such as insomnia and headaches. The feeling of a slow brain partly comes from the limbic system, the emotional center, being activated in a state of alarm, consuming cognitive resources from the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for higher-level thinking. The more anxious you are about not finding the problem, the more you lose the ability to solve it. This becomes a self-fulfilling loop. 3. The illusion of insufficient information. One of the deepest reasons we feel blinded is a form of cognitive blindness identified recently, called the illusion of information adequacy. An experimental study with 1,261 participants, published in PLOS One in October 2024, found that people tend to assume that the information they currently have is sufficient to make decisions, even when they are actually missing critical pieces. In the experiment, participants who only heard one side of an issue, for example, only the benefits of a school merger, were confident they had enough information to make a judgment, and they felt just as informed as those who had full data. Applied to your life, you are stuck not because you lack ability, but because you cannot see what you do not know, the unknown unknowns. You feel like you know where the problem lies, but in reality, you are only looking at a very small part of a much larger picture. The feeling of being blinded is not caused by any external force, but by the brain's overconfidence in the limited information it currently holds. 4. The nature of curiosity and being stuck. The feeling of being so close is also related to a phenomenon called the feeling of knowing, FOK. When you try to recall something or solve a problem, and you have a vague sense that you know it, your brain is experiencing an internal conflict. Research on memory and motivation, including a doctoral thesis at Western University in 2024, shows that unsuccessful retrieval is actually one of the strongest triggers for curiosity. The brain hates gaps. It creates a kind of cognitive itch that pushes you to search for answers. The problem is that if you do not change your approach or expand your sources of information, you will remain trapped in a loop of feeling like you know without ever actually recognizing the answer. Based on these scientific findings, there are several strategies to break free from the state of being one beat behind and blinded. Accept structured slowness. Do not try to multitask or compete with the speed of others. Recognize that your brain processes only about 10 bits per second. Focus on a single task at a time, because trying to do multiple things at once only worsens the bottleneck. Search for unknown unknowns. The most important strategy to break the illusion of information adequacy is to assume that you are missing information. Actively seek opposing perspectives and data you might consider irrelevant. Sometimes the missing piece lies in the place you least expect. Make effort and failure visible. To counter the floating duck syndrome, you need to break the surface. Share your struggles and your mistakes with colleagues or friends. Researchers recommend creating a shadow CV, where failures are listed even more than successes, to gain a realistic view of the effort required. The feeling of being just one step away, of having a slower brain, and of being blinded is not a sign of inadequacy. It is a sign that you are operating exactly as a human brain is designed to, but you are trapped in its cognitive traps. Lack of information, distorted social comparison, and negative emotional interference. The ghost here is nothing more than the gaps in the brain's processing algorithm. Once you can identify what that ghost is, information illusion, floating duck syndrome, the 10-bit per second bottleneck, you can learn to overcome it with awareness, intellectual humility, and strategic thinking.